Hey YouTube, how's it going? Thanks for joining us here for another video today. We're happy to bring to you the final start sit video of the fantasy regular season. At least that is for most of you guys in a lot of traditional leagues, that is. And really, it's crunch time. It's time to make sure. I know that a lot of people are going to be in and out based on how they perform this week, and so absolutely cannot afford to get these start sit information wrong. So we took a lot of extra time we put into this one. We think it's going to be a good week. We're very excited to do it. Of course, before we get started, a few things. One, keep an eye out for our contest. We still don't have the details figured out on that yet, but we want to mention that in every video so that hopefully as many people as possible hear about it and have an opportunity to compete. It'll be free, it'll be fun and casual, and it will extend your fantasy competition through the playoffs, not just the fantasy playoffs, but actually the NFL playoffs. And so that'll be a lot of extra fun. And then, of course, make sure to check out our community tab as we're posting things there and on our Instagram every day, posting polls on what sort of videos you guys want to see and lots of stats and information that don't quite make it into the videos. Without any further ado, I think we should quit wasting time and just roll right into it. Rob, do you want to take the first game?
All right, I'll take the first game. So let's take a look at the Saints versus the Cowboys. I like to start with the quarterbacks, but before I do that, if we don't mention a name in the video, you can safely assume to sit that guy. There's so many names, we can only cover so many. But I want to start with Drew Brees. Now, Drew Brees is playing the Dallas Cowboys, allowing the 15th most points to quarterbacks. And that Dallas defense is underrated. They're especially good against the pass. Now, if you look at Drew Brees this year, he's only really had one bad fantasy game. That was versus the Vikings. But consider a few things in that game. One, the Vikings defense is very good. We saw it last week against Aaron Rodgers and against some other quarterbacks this year. Really, the only quarterback that's had a good game versus them I would consider fantasy-wise would be Jared Goff, and he tore them apart. You look at that game, I really think a lack of his production was due to what I call game flow. They took the lead late in the first half, and then after that, they played conservatively, they ran the ball a lot, and they controlled the clock. And so I think a lot of that is he didn't need to do a lot to win that game there. But this is by far his best season of his illustrious career. Currently, his quarterback rate of 127.3. If the season ended today, that would shatter the previous record by Aaron Rodgers. His quarterback rate was 122.5. Currently, he's got 29 touchdown passes, 129 touchdown passes. Wouldn't that be nice? So he's got 29 touchdown passes to only 2 interceptions. He's on pace for 42 for the year. This is a guy, Drew Brees, that you start in the game, you don't think twice about it. Start Drew Brees. That's a no-brainer. I shouldn't even really need to give you any reason why to start him. Just go ahead and start that guy. I'll talk about Dak Prescott. Okay, so Dak plays New Orleans. New Orleans has given up the 5th most points to quarterbacks. Now, this is a game that Dak and the Dallas offense is going to have to throw the ball a lot to play catch-up. That New Orleans offense is pulling. Right now, they're number 1 in the NFL. They are scoring 37.2 points per game, so you know that Dak Prescott's going to have to throw the ball quite a bit to keep him in there. Now, if you look at Dak, his production has increased as the year has went on. Look at the first 3 weeks, he was averaging 11.47 fantasy points per game. In the last 8 games, he's averaging 21.82 points per game, so you've seen this increase in production. The addition of Amari Cooper has been huge for him. He's been a huge boost in that passing game. If you look with Amari Cooper in there, Dak Prescott is averaging 253 passing yards per game. Without Amari Cooper, it was 202, and so he's been a major boost for that passing offense. Also, Dak Prescott has added 5 rushing touchdowns in the last 6 games. So I look at Dak Prescott. I think he's a very good volume play. Now, I do have a little bit of concerns there. I think that Saints defense has gotten better as the year has went on, but they are playing in Dallas, so I think that offsets some of those concerns. I would start Dak Prescott this week. I actually have Tom Brady in a league, so I'm looking at Tom Brady or Dak Prescott. Obviously, the safe play would be Tom Brady, but honestly, I'm going to start Dak Prescott in this game. I feel good about that one. Let's look at the running backs. Ezekiel Elliott. He's playing the Saints, allowing the 5th fewest points to running backs. Now, some of the reason why running backs are not scoring a lot of points against the Saints has to do with game flow. Teams are getting behind, and they can't stick to the run because they got to play catch-up. And so I think those numbers are a little bit skewed there. I think they can be exposed on the run. So I think running might be tough for Ezekiel, but here's another thing. That Dallas offensive line is one of the best in the NFL when it comes to running the ball. In fact, arguably the best offensive line in the NFL when it comes to run blocking there. Another thing is backs that are active in the passing game versus the Saints have had success. Running backs that can get out and catch the ball in the backfield. Well, Zeke is one of those backs. He's got 47 catches on the year. He leads the Cowboys in reception. So I think that he's a good play there. He's having a great year, 4.9 yards per carry, 8 touchdowns. Currently he's on pace for over 2,090 total yards. He's a weekly must start there. So Ezekiel is the guy that you're going to start no matter what. Let's look at Mark Ingram. So he's playing the Cowboys, who allow the 8th fewest points to running backs. Now, if you look at Mark Ingram, he's being actively used in that offense, although this year they've significantly decreased his role in the passing game. This season he's averaging 1.85 catches per game. The 3 previous years he was averaging 3.5 catches per game. And I think the reason why that is if you look at Alvin Kamara, he's simply a more explosive back, best used in space in the passing game, so that lowers Ingram's value in PPR leagues. With that said, I look at Ingram in this matchup. I think he's a running back 3 in PPR leagues. He's a very strong running back 2 in standards. He's averaging 13 carries per game. He's had 5 touchdowns after he came back from his 4-game suspension there, and so that's where I would say he kind of slots there. And then there's Alvin Kamara. He's got 15 touchdowns in 11 games this year and over 1,200 yards total. He's got 57 catches. This guy is a stud. He is a great RB1 in PPR leagues, and he's solid RB1 in standards. You start him every week, regardless of who they're playing. You start Alvin Kamara, that's a no-brainer. The only time you'd even consider sitting him would be maybe in Week 16 in a fantasy championship if we get indications that the Saints are looking at resting their starters. With that said, I don't think that's going to happen in a Week 16, which is when most fantasy championships take place. Let's look at the wide receivers. Michael Thomas. Dallas gives up the 3rd fewest points to wide receivers. Now, I know he disappointed a lot of owners last week, but he's having a phenomenal year, and you need to start him no matter the matchup. Go ahead and start Michael Thomas. Now, let's look at the other Saints wide receivers. Look at Traquan Smith. He was limited Monday's practice. They played Thursday night, and it's trending towards him sitting. With that said, you also add the fact that he's been inconsistent in his usage and his targets. All those things would tell me he's a guy to avoid. As far as the other wide receivers, Austin Carr, Keith Kirkwood, same thing. They haven't had a lot of consistent touches and targets. Those are guys that, even though have potential, I would stay away from those guys there in a tougher matchup versus a Dallas secondary that's solid. Let's go to Amari Cooper. So a lot of people in there thought he had lost it. So is his resurgence with the Cowboys an anomaly, or is he back? Well, before the Cowboys made the trade for Amari Cooper, they actually did some research and they looked at analytics, and what they found out was he was still getting the 5th best separation among wide receivers. This is a guy that was getting separation that showed he had talent. He's a former 1st-round pick. And before he got traded, he did have 2 huge games with the Ravens. He had one game, he had 10 catches, 116 yards. He had another game with 8 catches, 128 yards and a touchdown. I know he actually won you a game last week. He was phenomenal. So if you take a look at his numbers with the Cowboys projected over 16 games, here's what it would turn out to be. Over 16 games at this current pace with the Cowboys, 88 catches, 1,396 yards, and 12 touchdowns. Playing the Saints, allowing the most points to wide receivers. So I would start as a low-end wide receiver 1 in large leagues, and if you're in a smaller league, he's a wide receiver 2. You got to start Amari Cooper. As far as the other Cowboy receivers go, after Cooper and Elliott, then I look at Cole Beasley. Right now he's got 46 catches on the year. He's averaging 4 catches per game, but his yards are lower. So he's got a lower ceiling. The only way you'd ever consider starting this guy would be in a PPR league that's very large in terms of teams, and he would have to be a flex play for you. I would sit all the other wide receivers. As far as tight ends go, you got Benjamin Watson. He have an occasional decent game, but for the last 6 games, he's had 0 or 1 catches. You can't trust this guy. You can't start him. I would sit the Cowboys tight ends versus New Orleans, allowed the 3rd fewest points to tight ends. As far as kickers go, I would start Lutz, and then Dallas's kicker is not a bad play, but here's the thing. Field goals are not going to win you this game. They're going to need extra points. I see them go for 2-point conversion. I would sit the Dallas kicker. The New Orleans Saints, what I would call a mid-range defensive start, although I'd probably lean towards probably sitting them if you can afford it, and I would sit the Dallas defense.
All right. So here we come now to my first game. This is the Atlanta Falcons versus the Baltimore Ravens. This was an interesting one to research. As far as it goes for the quarterbacks, this is interesting because Lamar Jackson and Joe Flacco, what's going on there? And quite simply, the mess of things that's going on there tells you don't start either. Right now, I'm hearing a lot of reports that say that they should actually be splitting time on the field, that Joe Flacco is looking better and that he might play, but that they'll split time. The way I see it, either Lamar Jackson plays and he hasn't been great, or Joe Flacco plays and he hasn't been great, or they both play and that's even worse. Simply the fact is that since week 5, they've combined for a touchdown interception ratio of 5 TDs to 7 interceptions. Despite the fact that the Atlanta Falcons give the 2nd most fantasy points to quarterbacks, they're not going to be able to capitalize on that lack of defense there. They don't want to. John Harbaugh, the way he coaches, they're going to run the ball, they're going to play defense. It's just they're not great fantasy options at quarterback. On the other side, Matt Ryan. Now, Matt Ryan has thrown for 330-plus yards in 5 of Atlanta's past 6 games. He has been on fire lately. But the Baltimore Ravens give the 5th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. So kind of how does that balance out? Well, he's got great weapons, and honestly the running game has been struggling, so I would probably say to start Matt Ryan. I'm not going to say that your expectation should be extremely high. But I think that he does crack, if you're in a 12 or a 14, especially a 16-team league, he definitely cracks the lineup. For me, he's right around in that 12 range. Not a great starter, but should probably make a lineup. Of course, it always depends on who else you have for options there. Now we go to the running backs, and I want to talk about Tevin Coleman because I'm going to say don't start Tevin Coleman, especially in the standard leagues. We know that he has some added value in PPR leagues. Put simply, the Baltimore Ravens give up the second fewest fantasy points to running backs this season. In fact, they're only giving up 92 rushing yards per game on average. So they are very, very, very tough on the run. And on top of that, Tevin Coleman has averaged just 36 rushing yards per game over the last 3 games. He's just not getting it done on the ground and has a particularly tough matchup. While I would typically say, okay, but you should still start him in a PPR league, he's been all right in a PPR league. He's been all right in the passing game, but I don't honestly know if he's been enough to make up for that. Of course, it depends on your situation, but I'm going to say probably look for another option this week. On the other side, Gus Edwards in a standard league, you got to start the guy. He goes against the Falcons, who give up the second most points to running backs. He's had 2 straight 100-yard games. Again, he loses some value in a PPR league for sure, but in a standard league, he is definitely a solid RB2 or should make a flex at the least. We go now to the wide receivers, guys. How obvious does it have to be? You should start Julio Jones. I understand that the Ravens defense is good and they do give up the second fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, but Julio Jones has been on fire. I believe he has had 6 straight games with over 100 yards receiving. 3 of the last 4 games he's had a touchdown. The guy's been insane. He had 11 catches for 147 yards last week against the New Orleans Saints. I mean, how can you not put this guy in your lineup, honestly? What about Calvin Ridley, though? Again, he does face that dilemma of that is a very good defense, but he did post his second highest career yardage totals last week with 93 yards, and he had his 8th touchdown. For me, he's a wide receiver 3 or a flex play because he will be limited in that tough matchup, but he has been playing so good. I do trust him, and I like that he plays across from Julio Jones, and so Calvin Ridley should probably crack a lineup, but again, at a wide receiver 3 or a flex spot. Honestly, guys, don't mess around. Don't start any of the Ravens wide receivers. Over the last 2 games, so basically when Lamar Jackson has been in, the top 3 wide receivers for that team have combined for 11 catches. That's 1.8 catches per game per person. That's awful. I mean, that is horrendous. I don't understand how they are doing so little in the passing game, so just don't mess around with any of them. Move on now to the tight ends. Austin Hooper. Austin Hooper's in this interesting situation. Baltimore gives up the 15th most points to tight ends. So that's a slightly good matchup, but he's been in a bit of a slump lately, just having 27 receiving yards and 31 receiving yards in the past 2 games. And so honestly, if I were you, I wouldn't start him again. We look at all the other options in that offense, Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley in the passing game, Tevin Coleman in the passing game a little bit, even though I did kind of talk him down a little bit ago. And so I'm going to say don't start him. He's a bit of a touchdown and matchup dependent. Well, the matchup is okay. He's been in a slump, and I don't think that you can safely say he's going to score. And then on the other side, the tight end who's been playing a lot for Baltimore is Mark Andrews. Honestly, he's averaging just 28 receiving yards a game. He's only had 2 touchdowns all year. Those numbers have even really dropped when Lamar came in. He's only had 2 catches in the last 2 games, so do not start any Baltimore tight ends. Move on now to the tight ends. Matt Bryant and Justin Tucker, these are both good kickers. While the Ravens do have the second fewest points to kickers, he's kicking pretty well over the last 2 weeks. He's 2 weeks removed from a nice 17-point performance. He did miss some games a while back due to injury, but he is healthy now. So he is limited. He's not a great play, but he's a good play. And of course, you got to start Justin Tucker. He's been insane. In the last 3 weeks, he made all 8 of his field goal attempts, plus he's made all 6 of his extra points. He's the model of consistency. How can you not play Justin Tucker? On the other side, moving on now to the defenses real quick, Atlanta and Baltimore. This is kind of interesting. I would start Atlanta. They have struggled over the last 3 weeks. They've combined for only 6 fantasy points, but that was against some better offenses. The Cowboys, the Saints, and the Browns. Now they come to an offense that seemingly doesn't have a quarterback situation at all. I think they could certainly take advantage of that. But much like everybody else in this game, don't expect them to do too highly. They are a very low start. And then Baltimore. Atlanta gives up the 11th fewest fantasy points, and Baltimore is a very good defense, but they're not a great fantasy defense, so I would probably tend to avoid starting them if possible. While they did have 18 fantasy points last week, that was against the horrendous Oakland offense, so how could they not? So that's that. I would probably start Atlanta, but I wouldn't start Baltimore. I guess there's that for that game.
All right. So let's talk about the Broncos versus the Bengals. Start with the quarterbacks. Case Keenum there. Cincinnati is allowing the most points to quarterbacks. They're actually allowing 297 passing yards per game. That number would actually be higher, but the reason why it's not higher than that is a lot of teams have been in some lopsided game versus the Bengals where they didn't need to throw late in the game. I'm not a big fan of Case Keenum. I think I've made that very clear all year. With that said, I think he's a great play this week. So if you need to stream a quarterback, that's the guy that I would go with. Undoubtedly, I like him. If I have a concern about Case Keenum, my biggest concern is the possibility of a blowout there with basically unproven quarterback Jeff Driscoll starting for the Bengals. So once again, I love Case Keenum against the worst defense in the NFL in terms of points allowed to quarterbacks there. Let's get to the quarterback situation for the Bengals. So Andy Dalton, a day after Cincinnati came out and said he was day-to-day with a sprained thumb, puts him on the IR, and he's done for the year. So that leaves Jeff Driscoll to be their starter. At this point, I don't know how much that's going to hurt him because I think Andy Dalton had been pretty ineffective. With that said, this guy is full of a lot of question marks also. Now, he did fill in the Browns game. He had 155 yards and a touchdown. Now he faces Chubb and Miller and a pretty good defense. You look at Denver, who can bring pressure on the quarterback, and they're in playoff contention at this point, so there's a lot of incentive for them to play well and win that game. And the Broncos are allowing the 16th fewest points to quarterbacks, so I would look at Jeff Driscoll in this one, and I would say he's a guy that you're going to sit. Let's move on to running backs. Look at the running backs for Denver. Philip Lindsay. So Cincinnati is allowing the third most points to running backs. They're allowing 147 rushing yards per game, and that's actually been getting worse and worse as the year has gone on. Earlier in the year, the first 4 games, they weren't too bad. Last week, he broke 100 rushing yards, actually 110 to be exact. He's having a very good season, 5.8 yards per carry, 7 touchdowns on the year. He's used in the passing game. He's got very good hands. So for me, I would say that he's a great running back 2 start. I like to say running back 1 because the matchup is that good for him. But the one concern I do have for him at this point is that he's a smaller back at 190 pounds. They tend to limit his carries. 4 years only averaging 12 carries per game. So I think what's going to happen in that game, I imagine Denver's going to win this one. Late in the second half, it could be lopsided. And I think Royce Freeman's going to get some carries there. So I love Lindsay. I love him as a running back 2. He should be a running back 1, but I think his limited carries bumps him down a little bit. Now it brings us to Royce Freeman. Now I suspect he's going to get more carries in this game, but he's a guy that what I would call touchdown dependent in standard leagues. Now he does have 5 touchdowns in 9 games, but each week his effectiveness has been dropping. He's solely had value only in standard leagues. For me, even in a great matchup, there's just too much risk there, so I see him as a running back 4. I would advise sitting. Talk about Joe Mixon. So Andy Dalton's out, and AJ Green might be out again. Now, I know what the Bengals are going to want to do. I suspect what they're going to want to do to help this guy, Jeff Driscoll, starting is lean on Mixon, run the ball a lot, and take pressure off of that quarterback. But I would imagine that Denver's going to try to load the box, shut down the run, and force this guy to throw the ball. And I think that's going to make life difficult for Joe Mixon there. Look at Denver. They're allowing the 14th most points to running backs. But I think that number is a little deceiving. They were gouged for 3 weeks by Crowell and the Jets, Todd Gurley, and Hunt for a total of 647 yards. But since then, they've tightened up their run defense significantly. Since then, in games versus David Johnson, Hunt, they faced a second time, and Melvin Gordon, they only allowed an average of 53 yards per game against those guys, some pretty good running backs there. And so I think even though they would, on paper, appear to be giving up a lot of points to running backs, I think that that's a little bit deceiving at this point. Now, if you look at Joe Mixon, he's really fulfilling the potential that a lot of people felt he had coming out of college. He's had him a great year, 4.7 yards per carry. He's had 7 touchdowns in 9 games, plus 31 catches. He's got good size at 220. He's a complete back. He's a true 3-down back. So, taking a look at all that information, I would say I would start him as a low-end running back 2. I'd like to put him higher, but I think in the matchup, you got to bump him down there. Matchup for me is a concern, but for most owners out there, you don't have a deep enough bench that you can sit Joe Mixon. So for 90% of you out there, you're probably going to have to start him, but start him with lower expectations in this matchup. Let's look at the wide receivers. Look at Cincinnati's Tyler Boyd. Denver allows the 11th fewest points to wide receivers. Now, the third-year receiver is having a very good year. If you look at his rookie year, he was very good, and then his sophomore season, he had to fight some injuries a little bit there. Right now, he has 6 touchdowns. He's on pace for over 1,020 receiving yards and 92 catches. He's having a very good year there. But most likely, A.J. Green's going to be out, and he's going to face Chris Harris, who is a very good corner. Now, if Green's out and Boyd faces Harris, If you look at last game when Harris faced Antonio Brown, which is a very good wide receiver for Pittsburgh, he really made things tough for Antonio Brown there. Now, Juju Smith-Schuster had a huge game, but that, once again, Antonio Brown saw a majority of his snaps versus Chris Harris. So I think that's a bit concerning for me if I look at Tyler Boyd in this matchup. So if I take a look at the fact that he's got a tough matchup, you look at Driscoll starting. If Green is out, I know the conventional wisdom is the idea is if Green is out, that means Boyd's going to get more targets. But I think being the primary wide receiver in that matchup actually hurts him. So here's what I would say. If Green is out, he's a wide receiver 3. If Green plays, I would actually bump Tyler Boyd into a wide receiver 2 category. That's kind of how I shake that out in this matchup here. As far as A.J. Green goes, Denver is solid defense. He will face Chris Harris in that game with an unproven quarterback starting. And so there's so many things I would say to stay away from. Plus, I love to have what I would call a prove-it game with A.J. Green, where he comes back, he plays, we see that toe is fine, he's good to go. With that said, even though a lot of things would say to sit this guy, he still is A.J. Green. And so for me, normally A.J. Green is a guy that's a wide receiver 2 this week. I say he's a wide receiver. Normally A.J. Green is a wide receiver 1, but this week, if he plays, we'll have to monitor that. He's a wide receiver 2. Personally, I suspect he's going to miss another game. Let's look at John Ross. He's had touchdown 3 weeks in a row, but his catches and yards are low. He's playing a solid Denver defense with Jeff Driscoll starting at quarterback. For me, he's a wide receiver 4. I would advise sitting. Then you got Emmanuel Sanders. The Bengals allowed the 8th most points to wide receivers. Since week 4, that number has actually gone up. You take that into account the fact that 3 to 5 in terms of points allowed to wide receivers. Everything makes this amazing or a great matchup for Emmanuel Sanders. He's hands down the best wide receiver for the Broncos, and Case Keenum's favorite target there. So I would start him this weekend as a very high-end wide receiver 2. He's on pace for his second best season as a pro. He's on pace to get over 1,235 yards. Then it brings us to Courtland Sutton. He was a major disappointment last week. He had 1 catch, 14 yards, but that was against a much improved Steelers defense. Now this week he plays a Cincinnati defense that is not good at all. I would start him as a wide receiver 3. I expect him to have a decent game, something like 4 catches, 80 yards, and maybe he'll find pay dirt. Let's talk about tight ends, Jeff Hireman. So the Broncos tight end suffered broken ribs and a bruised lung, so he's out for the year. And that leaves the next guy up, Matt LaCrosse. Matt LaCrosse is playing Cincinnati, allowing the 3rd most points to tight ends, but he's unproven, he's inexperienced. You got an unproven and inexperienced quarterback starting, so I would just avoid that altogether. Then let's look at Cincinnati, C.J. Azuma. Now I know somebody's going to correct me on my pronunciation, and I'll just put this out there. If you're looking for proper grammar or you're looking for solid fantasy advice, I probably got it wrong. Quite honestly, who knows? You can tell me what his proper enunciation is. Playing Denver, allowing the 13 most points to tight ends, but he's had some great matchups this year and has actually failed to deliver even in great matchups. Adding once again to what I've already said many times, got Jeff Driscoll starting at quarterback. I would just stay away from him, avoid him altogether. I would sit Cincinnati's kicker Bullock, and I would start Brandon McManus, playing the team that allows the 3rd most points to kickers. I would start Denver's defense, and I would sit Cincinnati's defense.
All right. Now we come in here, Rams versus Lions. This one's pretty simple. Of course, Jared Goff. How can you not start that guy going against the Lions? He's been playing so well. He's averaging 3 touchdowns a game over the last 4 games, and the Lions give up the 11th most points to quarterbacks. However, I'm probably not going to say that he's going to be quite as good as he's been. Like you talked about, yes, you're going to start him, but lower your expectations a bit. I think the Lions are so bad that he's going to be limited in what they're going to ask him to do. I mean, you look at it, they played Green Bay, New Orleans, Seattle, and Kansas City. Of course, he was asked to throw 3 touchdowns a game. Now you play a very bad Lions team, and you have a very good running back in Todd Gurley. I don't think he's going to need to throw that many touchdowns, but he's still going to be good, and you should still start him. On the other side, Matthew Stafford. While they do play the Rams, who give the 7th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, he's been playing bad. He's only had 3 touchdowns in the last 4 games, a 3 touchdown to 4 interception ratio, which is not very good. And then on top of that, you also have to look at the fact that why are the Rams giving up so many points to quarterbacks? It's not because their defense is bad, and certainly their defense is not great, but they just score so many points. Quarterbacks are constantly throwing against them, like all the time. I think that number is a bit skewed, and I don't think you should be starting Matthew Stafford this week. I move on now to the running backs, guys. Come on. You know you should start Todd Gurley. The guy's averaging 26.5 fantasy points per game this season. He's on fire. He's insane. You know you should start him. But then we come to a much blurrier side here when we go to the Lions. Theo Riddick. Theo Riddick, simply you should start in a PPR and you should not in a standard. Over the last 4 games, he has 28 targets for 25 catches. That's crazy, crazy high. And so, yes, of course, in a PPR league, how can you not start him? With the way that wide receiving core is banged up, they need to throw him the ball quite a bit. But in a standard league, he's just not running the ball a lot. He's not quite finding the end zone enough. LeGarrette Blount, don't play him, guys. He had a big week last week, but that was a real fluke. He has been extremely disappointing. He's just, 2 weeks removed from when he played Carolina and had 7 carries for a total of 1 yard, or 3 carries for 3 yards, or 5 carries for 8, or 6 carries for 4 yards. I mean, he's just not getting the job done. He had 1 big week. Good for him, but can you trust him? No, you cannot. Do not start LeGarrette Blount. You talked about this in our waiver wire video. Sometimes guys have big weeks for almost seemingly no reason, just off of a few big plays or whatever. That was just a fluke. Move on now to the wide receiver situation. Man, the Rams are still loaded with wideouts despite Cooper Kupp being gone. Brandon Cooks is very much a guy that you should start. He has 3 straight games with 100 yards. His targets are going up. He has had 8 targets last game. The game before 8 catches last game, 10 catches the game before, and 6 before that. He's playing very, very well. He's the #1 wide receiver in that offense, at least in my book. Robert Woods is another guy that you should maybe, okay, this is very difficult because he was on fire. He had 104 yards, 101, 92, 109, and then he kind of faded down where his targets were staying the same, but his receptions went down a bit and his touchdowns went down a bit. And since then, he's really been around that 70 yards range where he's getting about 4 or 5 catches for 70 yards and no touchdowns. I think he's too good not to start, and especially because Cooper Kupp is out, that helps him. But I would keep your expectations low. He's a wideout 3 at best the way he's been playing. And the other reason he's been playing that way is Josh Reynolds has come in and played very, very well. He's averaged 61 yards and 1.5 touchdowns in the 2 games that he has replaced Cooper Kupp. And while he has played well in those games, do you really expect him to keep that up with Todd Gurley, Brandon Cooks, and Robert Woods in that offense? Not really. Honestly, I don't. So I would probably advise against that, again, because they're playing a team in the Lions that aren't going to force them to score a ton. And so the only wideout I truly trust here is Brandon Cooks, but it's hard for me to tell anyone to keep Robert Woods out of their lineup, so I'd put him in, but very, very low expectations there. On the other side, it's important to mention for the Lions that Marvin Jones is out. I can't remember exactly what the injury is, but I believe he's placed on the IR. Is that not correct?
Yeah, he's done for the year.
Yeah,
so.
Okay. I always come into the videos and I know I have my notes and it's like I just want to check with you sometimes. But anyways, and they traded away Golden Tate, and so now really Kenny Galladay is the only wide receiver in that option. That's good and that's bad. He's going to get a lot of attention from his quarterback, but he's going to get a lot of attention from the opposing cornerback. He's averaging 12 targets a game over the last 3 games. That'll probably go up. He has 2 touchdowns in that period. He's playing very, very well. You should definitely start him, but I see him as a wide receiver 2 or 3. I don't think he can be a wide receiver 1, and even sometimes a wideout 2 to me seems a little bit high, simply because he's the only guy there. I mean, really, when you look at the running game is bad and there's no other wideouts or tight ends to throw to, who are you going to cover? You're going to cover Kenny Galladay. He's going to get a lot of attention. That should limit him. As far as tight ends go, I'm going to say don't start either of the tight ends in these games. Now, Detroit, the best game for tight ends, the best tight end game that a Detroit Lion tight end has had all season was 3 catches for 21 yards. Of all their tight ends, that's the best they could put together. And so don't start either of them. The tight end for the Rams, Gerald Everett, they do play the Lions, who have the 14th fewest points to tight ends. That's not an amazing matchup. And while he does have 3 receiving touchdowns in the last 2 games, you have to remember they scored 54 points against Kansas City in this insane, what people are calling the game of the year. So yeah, of course he managed to find the end zone. And even before that, they put up 36 on Seattle. That was a very close and important game. That trend will not continue. I would not play him. As far as the kickers go, how can you not start Greg Zuerlein? And Matt Prater, I'm probably going to say, I mean, it really does depend on how desperate you are, but he's just been so average and so pedestrian that I would look for other options, but he is a fallback. As far as the Rams goes, they scored 21 points against Kansas City's offense last week, so I would definitely start them because the Lions give the 8th most points to defenses, and I wouldn't start the Lions. The Rams give the 2nd fewest points to opposing defenses, and they only scored 7 fantasy points last week against the Bears, despite the Bears having their backup backup quarterback in. And so again, start the Rams defense, but not the Lions. That's my rundown for this game this week.
All right. Let's talk about the Cards versus the Packers. Start with quarterback Josh Rosen. The Green Bay Packers allowed the 8th fewest points to quarterbacks. Only one time this season has he thrown over 250 yards. Last 2 games he's averaged 120 passing yards per game. That's been bad. He's got more interceptions than touchdown passes. Stay away from starting Josh Rosen in this one. Look at Aaron Rodgers. So the Cardinals allowed the 4th fewest points to quarterbacks. Now he's having what I would call a very solid and efficient year. You look at he's got a quarterback rating of 102. He's got 20 touchdown passes to only 1 interception. That's very efficient. That's a very good quarterback play. But he's really disappointed in terms of fantasy quarterback. Currently, he's the 12th quarterback in fantasy points scored. There's been a lot of guys that have been ahead on there. I know that's disappointing for many of you. Going into the preseason, a lot of sites had him ranked as the #1 guy. So he's a guy that's probably too good to sit. But with the emergence of Aaron Jones in the running game and the lack of weapons outside of Adams, and the fact that the Cardinals' defense is solid, and also adding to the fact is Josh Rosen struggles means that most likely this won't be a high-scoring game and the Packers won't need to throw the ball quite a bit. So he's a guy that you could start. He's outside of the top 10 as far as rankings go this week. If you have a better option out there, you probably don't if you're an Aaron Rodgers owner. You can start him, but you have to have pretty low expectations going into this game. As far as running backs go, look at Aaron Jones. So he's playing Arizona, allowing the 5th most points to running backs there. Since week 8, when they really kind of committed to him being their running back, their go-to guy, to being the starter, his numbers have really taken off since then. He's had 6 touchdowns in 5 weeks, and he's averaged 107 total yards per game with 3 catches per game. Starting this week as a running back 2, this guy's got talent and the potential to become a running back 1. He's so good. We were huge on this guy all preseason, so I hope that you're a guy that listened to that advice and you have him. And it's in a game that Green Bay is probably going to be allowed to run the ball a lot in the second half, so I think his carries are going to go up. I expect a big game for him there. Brings us to David Johnson. So the Packers are middle of the road in terms of fantasy points allowed to backs. Now, since Brian Leftwich has taken over as the offensive coordinator for the Cards there, they've really made a concerted effort to get him more touches, and it's really translated to more production for David Johnson. Now, because Rosen is struggling quite a bit, teams are going to load the box, which means that David Johnson's yards per carry are going to be lower. You have to just be okay with that. But the last 4 games, he's averaging 129 total yards per game and 3.5 catches per game. Start David Johnson as a running back 2 in this one. As far as wide receivers go, I got Christian Kirk. So he's playing Green Bay, allowing the 12th most points to wide receivers, but inconsistent play from Rosen makes him a wide receiver 4. Now, this is a kid that's very talented, and he's going to find the end zone from time to time to make some big plays. But in that offense with Josh Rosen starting there, you just can't be trusted to start, at least not in this matchup. I would sit him. And you have Larry Fitzgerald, 5 touchdowns in the last 5 weeks. I feel bad for Larry. There's been stretches in his career where he's been really handcuffed to a bad quarterback. You look at between 2012 to 2014, and now again with Josh Rosen, it's really hurt him there. But he still has great hands. He's got a big body. He's physical, and so he's very talented there. You can start him as a wide receiver 3 in large leagues. Sadly, though, he's touchdown dependent, so for me, he's only got value in standard leagues. I wouldn't even think about it in PPR leagues. Then you got Devontae Adams. The Cardinals allow the 10th fewest points to wide receivers, but this is a guy that I would call matchup proof. Even though he's going to face Patrick Peterson, he's still a guy that you got to start. He's got 10 touchdowns on the year. This is a 3rd year in a row that he's had double-digit touchdowns. He broke 1,000 yards receiving. He already has his most catches of a season. This guy's having a great year. But because he's playing Patrick Peterson and the Cardinals, and say this week, instead of being a wide receiver 1, I would start him as a wide receiver 2, but a very high-end wide receiver 2. As far as the other Packer wide receivers go, I would sit all of them. You look at Marquez Valdes-Scantling. He's really disappointed the last 2 weeks. I do think, though, he's still their best number 2 guy out there. But with back-to-back weeks where he's only had 1 catch and just targeted 2.5 times per game, I think we need a rebound week before we can trust this guy, so sit him. As far as tight ends go, you have Ricky Seals-Jones playing Green Bay, allowing the 5th fewest points to tight ends. He really hasn't produced all year, sit him. Then you have Jimmy Graham. This is another one I'm excited about because we said in the preseason that he was overhyped. We weren't big on Jimmy Graham, and he has disappointed. Even before he broke his thumb, this guy was really struggling. And now he's playing the Cardinals, allowing the 7th fewest points at tight ends. Just sit this guy. As far as kickers go, I would really sit both kickers. If you have to start one kicker in the matchup, it would be Crosby, but I would sit both. As far as defenses, I would start Green Bay, and I would sit the Cardinals defense. There we go.
All right. All right, so last week we got an amazing matchup, game of the year, Chiefs versus Rams. This game, Dolphins versus Bills, is just not that game. This is probably the toilet bowl of all toilet bowls this season. honestly, I'm going to roll through this as fast as I can because it is ugly. The quarterback situation, Ryan Tannehill, he's got no weapons, and Buffalo gives the fewest points against quarterbacks. You're not going to start him. What about Josh Allen? Well, excuse me there. Well, if you excuse one play where he had a 75-yard touchdown, which was mostly on the receiver and not him, he only threw for 85 yards, 7 completions on 18 passing attempts, 0 touchdowns. He was awful. Besides one, what I would honestly call a lucky play, you're not going to start Josh Allen, really. At the running back position goes, the one guy from this game that looks kind of good is Kenyon Drake. Finally, it seems like the Dolphins are slowly moving into giving him a little bit of more playing time. Buffalo gives up the 9th most points to running backs, and in the last 4 games, Kenyon Drake has 2 different games with 22 plus fantasy points. So he's really starting to take off. He's very high risk, high reward, but I think that this might be a risk worth taking. Understand that when you put him in your lineup that there is a lot of risk, that he does have the downside of being able to honestly be a huge mistake. But if you think you can afford to take it in your situation where you have to take that risk, why not? Kenyon Drake has such a high upside. LaShawn McCoy, other than one good game this year, he's been absolutely brutal. And while the Dolphins do give the 5th most fantasy points to running backs, I'm still not a huge fan. If you're in a 16-team league, you probably do find yourself saying, I have no other choice. If so, sorry, but hopefully you have some depth at running back. Hopefully you followed our advice at the beginning of the year and before you drafted, and you took a lot of guys and you have some other options. As far as the wide receivers go, the Bills play the Dolphins, who give up the 10th fewest points, and the Dolphins against the Bills. The Bills give up the 1st fewest points to wide receivers. You're not going to start any Bills wideouts. You're not going to start any Dolphins wideouts. I know that that's quick and short and simple, but can you honestly convince yourself that any of those guys in this game are, safe and secure options that you feel confident that they're set to have a good game? Absolutely not. This is going to be a pretty low scoring and boring game. As well as the tight end situation. I don't really have anything to say on that. There's just no tight ends in this game that have any fantasy value. As far as the kickers go, Jason Sanders, he's very hit or miss, but he does have a good matchup against Buffalo, who gives it the 10th most points to kickers. In such a low-scoring game, I think he actually could be a good start. So if you're looking for a plug-and-play this week, I might roll with him. On the other side, Steven Hauschka, Miami gives the 5th most points to kickers, but he's not having a very good year. They're not kicking the ball out. The offense is struggling. He is making it when he's kicking, but simply the offense is so bad. I wouldn't play him despite it being a good matchup for him this week. Again, the offense is just so bad there in Buffalo for him. As far as the defenses go, Buffalo gives up the 1st most fantasy points to defenses. If you're desperate, you could maybe start the Dolphins defense, but I definitely wouldn't even consider starting the Bills defense. As fast and quick and maybe annoyingly hastily done that is my review for this game. There's really not a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I'll just add to that one simple point. I like Kenyon Drake. I think he's a guy that if he got more touches consistently, he can produce. Last year he did. This year we've seen that. I don't know why they're so insistent on giving Frank Gore so many touches, but you do have to watch it. He did leave last game banged up a little bit, so there's some question mark about his availability and health. It looks like he's going to play, but once again, monitor that. We're going to do a video this Friday. There's been a lot of changes in terms of guys on the IR, guys that have been injured, guys have been suspended, things like that. So on Friday, we're going to do an update to our waiver wire in the start set video, and we'll talk about guys like Kenyon Drake. Are they going to play? So
absolutely.
So let's talk about the Bears and the Giants. Start with quarterback Eli Manning. So the Bears allow the 13th fewest points to quarterbacks, but that actually is getting tougher and tougher on quarterbacks. They're improving. Now, if you look at the points allowed to quarterbacks, the last 5 games are only allowing 13.36 points per quarterback. That's really tough against quarterbacks. Okay. Now, if you look at the Bears, they had a stretch of 3 weeks, where it was in weeks 6 through 8, where they're only getting 2. They had only a total of 2 sacks per game. But Khalil Mack is back now, and he's healthy. Last 4 weeks, they have 14 sacks. The Bears allowed the 3rd fewest points per game at 316. They lead the NFL in the takeaway giveaway ratio. There's a lot of reasons why this Bears defense is a defense that you don't want to start a quarterback versus. You add to that fact that Evan Ingram is hurt and may miss the game. Eli is widely available, but he's a guy that I would once again sit. I just don't trust him against the Bears there. As far as Mitch Trubisky goes, Mitch Trubisky, make sure I get that right. Sometimes I say Mitch Trubisky and I never hear the end of it. Mitch Trubisky, there we go. Versus the Giants allowing the 10th fewest points to quarterbacks. Now, Mitch had a stretch from weeks 4 to weeks 8 that he averaged 33.28 fantasy points per game. This guy was on fire. But then 2 of the next 3 games, he had some quiet games. Well, one, the Bears destroyed the Bills, and he didn't need to do much. They had 2 defensive touchdowns. That game was out of control early in the first half, so they didn't need to do much. And then against the Vikings, he had a quiet game, but the Bears really controlled that game. They played it safe. They had conservative play calling there, and the score looked a lot closer than it really was there. Sandwich in between those 2 games where he was quiet, he destroyed the Detroit Lions. That huge game. When it comes down to whether or not you should start him, it's a matter of health. Right now, Trubisky, shoulder, is not allowed to return this week. According to ESPN's Adam Schefter, Trubisky is hopeful of suiting up, though his availability remains uncertain. So he's a guy that if he plays, I would play him, but we're going to have to monitor this come Friday, Saturday, and see if he's ready to go. As far as running backs go, you got Saquon Barkley. The Bears allow the 8th fewest points to running backs. It's really irrelevant for me to get into breakdowns. Saquon Barkley is an amazing back. He needs to be played. Right now, he's 2nd in fantasy points for running backs, only behind Todd Gurley. Just go ahead and start him. He should be started. He's great in all formats. As far as running backs for the Bears, look at Tariq Cohen. His value is only in really PPR leagues. It's very low in standards. But he's had a decent year, especially if you're in PPR leagues. He's got 6 touchdowns on the year, 4 catches per game, and he averages 45 receiving yards per game. And so for me, he's a running back 2 or a flex play in what I would call 12-team leagues or larger. As far as Jordan Howard goes, once again, the Giants are allowing the 12th most points to running backs, but I would sit Jordan Howard. He only has value in standard leagues, and he's touchdown dependent. He's averaging less than a touchdown per game. He's averaging less than a half touchdown per game, so it's even worse than I indicated initially. So he's averaging less than a half touchdown per game. He's only averaging 48 rushing yards per game. His yards per carry at 3.3 are brutal. I suspect that the Bears are going to move on from him in the offseason. He's simply not a good fit for Nagy's offense there. As far as wide receivers go, you have Odell Beckham playing the Bears, allowing the 10th most points to wide receivers. He's quietly on pace to have his most catches ever at 107. He's on pace to have his most yards at 1,480. He's a start as a wide receiver 1 every week. You got to start Odell Beckham. As far as Sterling Shepard go, so Sterling Shepard early in the season was on pace for over 1,000 receiving yards, but with Eli's marginal play, Odell Beckham's huge role in that offense, and Saquon Barkley's increased role in the passing game, where he was once considered a wide receiver 3 option, I would say now he's a guy that's fallen out of that role and you need to sit him. Now, as far as Anthony Miller, Allen Robinson, and Taylor Gabriel go, they play the Giants, allowing the 9th fewest points to wide receivers. All those wide receivers have had games, they've been productive, they've had some big games, they all have skill. And even in some games, they've had stretches this season where they've begun to separate themselves from other wide receivers, only to see that trend shift back. And so at this point, it's really hard to pin down who you can trust. All those guys are going to be boom or bust from week to week. None of them have a consistent amount of targets to trust in there. If we really want to look at it, it's probably Tyler Gabriel the last 2 games who's gotten targeted the most. But this offense is not like the Rams or the Chiefs. And so when I look at all these wide receivers, for me, they all fall in that wide receiver 4 category. I would probably sit them all unless you have to grab one of those guys there. As far as tight ends go, you got Evan Ingram. Ingram Handstrom is optimistic he's going to be ready for Sunday's game versus the Bears. He's facing the Bears, allowed the 10th fewest points to tight ends. When he has played this year, when he has been healthy, he's had moderate success. I think the Bears are going to create problems for Eli Manning there. There's many red flags, so right now I would lean towards sitting Evan Ingram. As far as Trey Burton goes, through the first 8 games, he had 5 touchdowns. And he had 2 games where his yardage totals were solid, but his production's beginning to drop quite a bit. They're only averaging 3.4 catches per game and 40 yards for the year. Not good. Now he's playing the Giants, allowing the 14th most points to tight ends. He's outside the top 10 for tight ends. You can start him, but know once again that he's not in the top 10 this week for as far as tight end rankings go. As far as kickers go, you have Rosas. Rosas have an excellent season, but the Bears are a tough matchup. He's an okay play, but not a great play. I'd say he's fair. As far as Parquet go, he's a fair play, but not a great. You could start both of those guys. They're not great options. They're not bad. As far as defense, start the Bears and sit the Giants. The only way to even consider starting the Giants defense is Mitch Trubisky sat. But even then, I think it'd be better to go look elsewhere.
All right, now Carolina plays Tampa Bay this week, and this should actually produce a lot of very good fantasy options for stars we look at. I like both quarterbacks in this game. Not only is the Tampa Bay defense very bad, Cam Newton has also been playing well. In fact, he's had at least 2 touchdowns in 10 straight games. You want a good play that's also a very safe play, Cam Newton is the quarterback for you. Move on to the other side there, Jameis Winston. Carolina gives it the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, and he has 3 games this year with at least 25 fantasy points, despite having the suspension and actually playing one game where he was only the quarterback for half a game and being benched for a game and all that sort of stuff. He's still been a very phenomenal fantasy option. He's just a product of that offense for whatever reason. Of course, running back Christian McCaffrey, with a great matchup, Tampa Bay gives up the 7th most points to running backs, and McCaffrey's been on fire lately. How could you not start this guy? He's insane. On the other side, Peyton Barber. I don't think you should start Peyton Barber. I think you should sit him. Carolina gives it the 8th fewest points to running backs. That's a pretty good run defense right there. And while he has scored in back-to-back weeks, he has no PPR value. He's not a huge yardage guy, and his yards per carry are low. He's very touchdown dependent, and against a tough defense like this, I honestly don't see him finding the end zone. If he does, you know, he certainly can, he certainly might, but can you expect that and feel safe that that's going to happen? No, you definitely cannot. As far as the wideouts go, DJ Moore, love the guy. I think you should definitely start him. Not only does Tampa Bay give up the 3rd most points to wide receivers, he's really solidified his role as the #1 wideout in that offense. Over the last 2 games, he's looked very good. He's going to get you 7 or 8 catches, close to 100 yards at least. He might find the end zone. Like DJ Moore looks very, very good. On the other side, Mike Evans. Yeah, you got to start Mike Evans. He's such a big name, and he performs so well. Carolina gives up the 13th most points to wideouts. In 4 of the last 6 games, Mike Evans has had 100 yards receiving or more, so that is very good. He's been extremely productive. How could you not play him? And then we see Adam Humphries. Really the 2nd best wideout in the offense is Adam Humphries. Again, 13th most points. Carolina gives up to wideouts, and he's actually had 4 touchdowns in the last 4 games, really solidifying his role in as the #2 wideout in that offense. But honestly, I still don't know if I trust him because there are still some other pieces there. Deshaun Jackson is there, Chris Godwin is there, and Cameron Brate is there. Of course, O.J. Howard is out. And so maybe if you're desperate, he could sneak his way in as a wide receiver 3, but if I'm being honest with you right now, that's got to be a very desperate play in my mind. Do you really think a guy who is in such honestly a spread out offense with a big name like Evans and a lot of other names who are somewhat producing to be able to consistently get a touchdown a game? No, I don't think so. You can feel safe and confident about that. What were you going to say?
You know, one thing I was going to say, I totally agree with that assessment. It's not one of those positions where any one of those guys could be good, but who do you really trust week to week besides Mike Evans, obviously? Deshaun Jackson got an injury right now he's dealing with. He's seen a specialist. Mm-hmm. If Deshaun Jackson, if they were to find out that he sits this week, then I would trust him a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But I agree, Jackson out there is questionable. So that's another thing that we'll give you Friday. We'll monitor that situation.
Yes, absolutely. And then, thank you for mentioning him. Now we come to Deshaun Jackson, who's a guy who's just, you're right, banged up. He's slowed down. He started the year hot, but he's a little bit older, and he's been struggling. He's banged up, injured, might not play. If he does play, do you really have faith in him? Do you really think he's going to have a good week? I've been saying that a lot today. Can you really trust them? No, not really. You move on now to the tight ends. What about Greg Olsen? I like Greg Olsen. Not only does Tampa give up the 4th most points to tight ends, I like him in a standard league only. In a PPR league, he loses a lot of value, but he's had 4 touchdowns in the last 6 games, and he should capitalize on a good matchup this week. Of course, you got to start Cameron Brate. Cameron Brate has looked very good and is finally now really getting an opportunity to shine now that O.J. Howard is out. And you know what? He took that increased role and he scored last week, and I wouldn't be surprised he could also do it again this week. And so I like both of those guys as options. As far as the kickers go, don't start Graham Gano. Not only does he go against a team that gives up the 14th fewest points to kickers, he's only made 13 field goals all season on 15 attempts. That is very bad. And the same goes for Cairo Santos. He's got a slightly difficult matchup and just hasn't been kicking well this season. As far as the defenses go, I like the Panthers defense. Again, they've got a very good matchup. However, they have combined for 0 fantasy points over the last 3 weeks. So I do not trust them as a fantasy defense. And then Tampa Bay is averaging just 3.6 fantasy points per game over the last 5 weeks. So I wouldn't start either of them. Simply haven't been producing. But that's my rundown for that game.
Let's talk about the Colts versus the Jags. Look at Andrew Luck. The wheels have really come off for a Jaguar team that was expected to compete for the AFC championship there. Now, at the beginning of the year, they ranked near the top in terms of shutting down quarterbacks, but now they're middle of the road. They allowed the 15th most points to quarterbacks there. Look at the first 4 games of the year. They're allowing only 11.27 points per game to quarterbacks. Last 4, games that are allowing 24.2 points to quarterbacks. Once again, that Jaguars team, everything's falling apart for them. Luck is having his best year as a pro. His quarterback grade right now is 103. He's on pace for 47 touchdown passes. Start Andrew Luck. He's faced some good defenses this year. It doesn't matter. He is on fire. Go ahead and play him. Now, finally, they benched Blake Bortles. We told you that was going to happen. We told you he wasn't good. Took a while, but he's finally benched this week. Cody Kessler is going to start. He's not much better than Blake Bortles on an offense that's below average, who just fired their offensive coordinator. Just sit him. As far as running backs go, you got TJ Yeldon. Leonard Fournette got suspended for this game coming up there. And so Yeldon, when Leonard was out early this year, he had some nice games. Now, he's very effective in the passing game. He's got very good hands. And so for me, he's got higher value in PPR leagues. Playing Indianapolis allows the 11th most points to running back. So I would start TJ in PPR leagues as a running back to her flex play. Now, a lot of people are going to think Carlos Hyde's the guy that's going to take a lot of those carries. He's going to definitely get carries, but I'm not sure he's going to have the same effectiveness that Leonard Fournette had there. Yes, he's going to get the ball on first and second down, but he hasn't been effective this year, so he'll get double-digit carries. I expect him to see maybe 10 to 12 carries in this game, but he just doesn't do enough for me. He has been effective enough in an offense that's below average to really trust him. So I would only consider starting him in standard leagues that have 14 teams or more, and for me, he runs as I would say, running back 3, borderline running back 2, maybe if you're desperate. As far as Mac goes, so the Jags allow the fewest points to running backs, and he's in concussion protocol. He's in concussion protocol, so let's monitor that and see if he's going to be available. But if he is available, once again, he's playing the Jaguars, allow the fewest points to running backs. Last time he faced them, he struggled quite a bit, 12 carries for 29 yards there. This week for me, he's a running back 3. That's kind of where I would land with him. There is a guy that I do like for the Colts I think is worth monitoring. That's Hines. So if Mac sits, Hines is very good in the passing game, and I think that if Mac were to sit, he could be started as a flex play in PPR leagues. As far as wide receivers go, you got T.Y. Hilton versus the Jags, allowing the 4th fewest points to wide receivers. With Andrew Luck back, okay, even against some good pass defenses, he's really tortured. In fact, the last 2 weeks, he's faced some very good pass defenses. He had 9 catches, 155 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He also had 7 catches, 125 yards. I think everybody forgot that back in 2016, when Andrew Luck was healthy and they were on the field together, he led the NFL in receiving yards. It's funny how our memories are so short and we forget about this guy. Most weeks, he should be considered a wide receiver 1. This week, though, against Jalen Ramsey, I would say he's a wide receiver 2. All their wide receivers for the Colts, I would sit. As far as the Jags wide receivers go, you got Westbrook, Moncrief, Cole in this one. They're playing the Colts that allow the 8th fewest points to wide receivers. Kessler is starting. None of those guys, wide receivers-wise, are consistently getting targets to trust. I would sit all those wide receivers. As far as tight ends go, Eric Ebron, former first-round pick, has resurrected his career. His career has taken off for the Colts there. He was looking good. He's got 12 touchdowns on the year, and then, boom, Doug goes in the IR. And I tell you what, I dropped him last week because I had Kittle, and I thought, I'm not going to really need this guy, and you got Doyle there. But now that Doyle's on the IR, Eric Ebron is going to be a top 5 tight end start for the rest of the year. That's a great play. You've got to start this guy. Andrew Luck targets his tight ends in the red zone more than any quarterback in the NFL, and it's not even close. And so this is a guy, Eric Ebron, that if you have him and he's on your team, great for you. You just got yourself a great break there. I would sit the Jags tight ends. Adam Vinatieri is a good play. Playing the Jaguars, allowing the 19th most points to kickers. I would sit Lambeau. The Colts defense, playing the Jaguars, allowing the 7th most points to defenses. With Kessler starting there, I think the Colts defense is a nice play, and I would sit the Jaguars defense this week. Anything I missed there?
No, sounds good. All right, now we come to the Texans versus the Browns. I like Baker Mayfield as a low-end start at quarterback. While the Texans give up only the 9th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, he's been so productive lately. He has 9 touchdowns in just the last 3 games and a very insane passer rating of 129.5. Just something to note, if you go to our community tab page, I've already posted about this a few days ago. We're doing a lot of information on stuff like that and a little bit more for you to check that out if you're curious. But anyways, we'll move on now. Deshaun Watson on the other end, I wouldn't start him. He's been very efficient, he's been very effective, but the defense is playing well, the running game is playing well, and they're not letting him throw the ball very much. In fact, It's been, what, 6 straight games where he's thrown the ball 25 times or fewer. That is very, very low. And before he becomes a viable fantasy option, again, or a solid, very good viable fantasy option, that needs to go up.
Yeah, the one thing I think that's done well is his legs are saved, and we saw last game.
Yeah.
But I hate to trust that my guy's got to run the ball to be effective there. But
well, I certainly refuse to do that, especially at quarterback, who got hurt last year, who specifically hurt his knee running the ball, right? And so, yeah, but we move on to the running backs. What about Nick Chubb? Wow, Texans give up the 10th fewest fantasy points to running backs. How are you not going to start this guy? He had his second straight multiple touchdown game. He also totaled 128 yards. Again, lower your expectations a little bit because the matchup is tough, but he's so good. I still think he's a very good option this week. And also another great option this week, specifically in this game, is Lamar Miller. In the past 5 games, 3 of those games, he's had 100-plus yards and a touchdown. He's been so good. And the Browns give up these 6th most points to running backs. So in standard leagues, Lamar Miller is a must start. Of course, he does lose a little bit of value in PPR leagues. At wide receiver, DeAndre Hopkins is obviously a must start. He has 6 touchdowns in 6 games. And against a team that gives it the 9th most points to wideouts, man, he could tear them apart. Now, Kiki Kuti. Now, this is an interesting one because, again, go against a team that gives the 9th most points to wide receivers, and he caught both of his targets last week, but then he left with a hamstring injury. And much like a lot of injuries this week, we haven't heard enough to know how healthy he is, whether or not he's going to play, how much he's going to play, to really know. So that's something that you're going to have to monitor. And I find we'll probably be getting a lot of questions on this week on really where is his status as we get closer and closer. If he's looking healthy and he's looking good, yeah, he's a good wide receiver 3 start. But there's a very good chance that he's looking banged up, and I have a hard time putting him in my lineup because of that. And so this is going to be just something to monitor going forward throughout the week. I apologize that we don't have any more information on that right now.
Yeah, it's hard to tell if we can trust if he's going to play, but I do think he tipped his hand early in the year in terms of how he's going to handle this injury. Here's hamstring early in the year, and he did say that I'm not going to take the field unless I'm 100%. So knowing he's already indicated he's not going to fight through that or appear in a game if he's not 100%, that's telling me that most likely he's going to sit, but we don't know that for sure.
Yeah. As far as the Browns wide receivers go, really the best guy there is Antonio Callaway, and even him, I don't think that you can feel comfortable starting him. The Texans give up the 6th fewest points to wide receivers, and for the number 1 wideout in that offense right now, he's only got 388 yards and 3 touchdowns this year. And so he has been playing better lately. I don't know if you disagree with me on this, Rob, but I don't trust him. At best, for me, he's a wide receiver 3, and I'm still not confident. We'll move on now to the tight ends. Of course, at a thin tight end position, you got to start David Njoku, who has a good matchup and played really well last week. He caught all 5 of his targets for 63 yards and a touchdown, and again comes into a good matchup against a team that gives up the 6th most points to tight ends. The tight end there for the Texans, Jordan Thomas. No, he only has 11 catches and 144 yards all season. He's not worth a start for sure. As far as the kickers go, kicker Fairbairn, he has only had 10 points last week and leads the NFL with 29 field goal attempts. He had 10 points last week. I'm having a hard time speaking. I think that he's a mediocre start because the Browns give the 10th fewest points to kickers. That very much lowers his value, but he's kicking more field goals than any other kicker in the NFL right now, so he does keep some value in that aspect. And then Greg Joseph, kicker for the Browns, hasn't even attempted a field goal in 2 weeks and goes against a team that gives up the 16th fewest points to kickers, so I'm going to sit him. As far as the defenses go, I'm probably not going to start either. Both teams are pretty simple. Texans go against the Browns, which give up the 15th most points to opposing defenses, but that's very deceiving. They've only given up 2 sacks and 2 turnovers in the last 3 games total, so I wouldn't start the Texans or the Browns defense this week. They don't seem to be turning the ball over a lot or allowing a lot of pressure on the quarterback, either of these teams. And so again, that's my rundown for this week. If you have any more questions, make sure to ask.
Talk about the Jets versus the Titans. Look at Sam Darnold, Josh McCown. Really, most reports indicate that Sam Darnold's not going to be back until week 14, but it doesn't matter if he comes back this week. He's been bad all year. You're going to sit him regardless. And then Josh is only slightly a bit better, playing the Titans along the 11th fewest points to quarterbacks. Sit both of those guys. As far as Marcus Mariota goes there, can you say bipolar? This guy is confusing. He's had 4 games this year where he's averaged 27.6 points per game. But all the other games, he's averaged 7.7 points per game. And so this is a guy that he's all or nothing. He's so boom or bust. I will say this, though. 3 of the last 4 games, he scored over 20 fantasy points per game. So it looks like he's healthy. Looks like he's trending upwards there. Looks like he's really turned a corner. Now he's playing the Jets, allowing the 13th most points to quarterbacks there. And that number would actually be higher, but they've played some teams that were leading quite a bit in the second half and didn't need to throw a lot there. So Marcus can be started in this one. I think he's a decent play, but he does carry some risk. He's had a history of injury issues, so this guy's 1 sack away from sitting out the game, missing time. And so that's always scary for me, but once again, I think he has turned a corner. He is playing better. He looks like he's healthy, and so if you need to stream a guy in most leagues, he's actually available out there. As far as running backs go, look at Dion Lewis. He had a bad week last week, but he saved the day with 7 catches, so if you're in a PPR league, you did okay with him. He's got 43 catches on the year, and so he's a guy that I wouldn't start in standard leagues, but in PPR leagues I would start as a flex play. As far as Derrick Henry goes, he had 2 weeks that looked like maybe he was turning a corner there, and we said that he wasn't back. We said that was an anomaly, that he was not going to sustain that production. We warned against trusting this guy in the preseason. We said that there's a lot of what we called, I guess, sabermetrics, analytics to show that there's just major concerns with this guy there. He's not very active in the passing game. Now, he was playing the Jets, allowed the 13th most points to running backs. But with that said, he's been brutal all year, minus those 2 games. Even those games weren't great, they were decent. I would say for me, he's a running back 4 this week. I would avoid starting him if I could. As far as the Jets running backs go, you got Crowell and McGuire playing Tennessee, allowing the 4th fewest points to running backs. Last week, Tennessee got gouged by Lamar Miller. Okay, but you take that game away, they've been very, very tough to opposing running backs. I would sit all running backs for the Jets. As far as wide receivers go, you have Corey Davis playing the Jets, allowing the 3rd most points to wide receivers. The former first-round pick is their best and most targeted wide receiver there. 2 of the last 3 games, he's been very productive. I would start him as a wide receiver 2. I would sit all their Titans wide receivers. As far as Jets wide receivers go, you have Quincy Enunwa playing the Titans, allowing the 5th most points to wide receivers. He's a guy that really only has value in PPR leagues, but even for me in this matchup, I would still say he sits outside a guy that I would trust starting. He's a wide receiver 4. As far as tight ends go, you have Chris Herndon. So the rookie's got better and better as the year has went on. He had 3 games in a row that he had a touchdown in the last 6 games. He's become the most reliable player in the passing game. Now he's versus the tight ends, allowing the fewest points to tight ends. And so a guy looks good. I like Chris Herndon. He's been promising, but he's against the most stingy defense in terms of points allowed to tight ends there. So I would sit him. As far as Juno Smith, he plays the Jets, allowing the 4th fewest points to tight ends. Now he has 3 Ts in the last 4 games. Last 4 weeks his production has picked up, but he's not a proven commodity, and because he has a tough matchup, I would also sit him. I would start Ryan Suckup. I would sit Myers. I would start the Titans defense, and I would sit the Jets defense.
All right, Chiefs-Raiders here, pretty lopsided game. Obviously, you're going to start Patrick Mahomes, and I don't want to waste any time explaining why, but I do want to say that in the last 6 games, he has 23 passing touchdowns, which means he is 1 away from averaging 4 touchdowns a game over the last 6 games. That's insane numbers. So obviously, you're going to start him. On the other side, I'm probably going to sit Derek Carr. He just doesn't have the weapons to work with, and the Chiefs' defense is actually fairly good. They're certainly not great. I'm not going to hype them up too much, but he just hasn't been playing well. Derek Carr, as a fantasy option goes. On the running back side, you go to Kareem Hunt, obviously. Obviously, you got to start him. The Raiders give up the 8th most points to running backs. He's topped 100 yards from scrimmage 5 times in the last 8 games and scored 11 touchdowns over that same stretch. So you got to start him. The Raiders running back situation, because they're falling behind or are going to fall behind and throw the ball a lot, I don't see any running back there being very valuable. I know that people have been excited about Doug Martin and the matchup because Chiefs actually do give up the most points to running backs. But he's only averaging 4.4 yards per carry. They're going to be passing the ball a lot, and he only has 1 touchdown all year. So some people are excited about Doug Martin, but I'm going to say stay away from him. In the wide receiver category, obviously you're going to start Tyreek Hill. He's got 4 receiving touchdowns in the last 2 games, no duh. Sammy Watkins, while I would like to say at the beginning of the year I liked him and I want to say, hey, you should put him in your lineup, he's just been struggling with injury, and in a game where they're not going to need to score too many points to win that, I don't think that even if he does play, he's going to play that well. He's only had 1 catch and 6 yards the last 2 weeks. He's just been banged up. There's really no notable Raiders wide receivers that I can even close to think putting in your lineup that have been, performing well or that are standing out or I think separate themselves. And so I'm going to stay away from that entire situation. I'd bench all of them. Of course, Travis Kelce, another guy. You got to start Travis Kelce. He's Travis Kelce. He's 4 touchdowns in the last 4 weeks. There's enough said. Jared Cook. If you're looking for a tight end this week, I might start him. He's had back-to-back scoring weeks, and he has a good matchup. The Chiefs give up the 3rd most points to tight ends, and with how thin and bad that receiving core is, Derek Carr is going to be looking to throw his way quite a bit. This could be a good matchup for him. As far as the kickers go, I'd start Harrison Butker and I would sit Daniel Carlson. As far as the defenses go, how could you not start the Kansas City Chiefs? They have 17 sacks and 7 turnovers and a touchdown in the last 4 games, and the Raiders give up the 3rd most points to opposing defenses. And obviously, the way they've been playing, you should not start the Raiders defense.
All right. Let's talk about the Vikes versus the Patriots there. Look at Kirk Cousins, quarterback, playing New England, giving up the 10th most points to quarterbacks. Right now, Kirk Cousins having his best season in terms of quarterback rating. He's averaging 300 passing yards per game, and he's on pace for 32 touchdown passes, would also be a career best. I would start him this week. Then there's Tom Brady versus Minnesota. Tom Brady is allowing the 10th fewest points to quarterbacks. Tom's having a decent season, but not a great season. Now, the thing that does bode well from the game is at home. Gronkowski is now back. And they have a very good cornerback, Xavier Rhodes, the Vikings do, who is questionable for this weekend. And obviously, if he sits, that's a huge boost for that Patriots offense there. I think this week is going to have a decent game. I would expect something like 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. Not a bad day, but you might have better options out there. He's got a safe floor, but a low ceiling. As far as running backs go, you have Dalvin Cook. The Patriots allow the 13th fewest points to running backs. The last 3 games since he came back from his hamstring injury, he hasn't ran the ball great, but we did see a beautiful screenplay for a touchdown that just reminds us how versatile this guy is. He's so good in the passing game. He's great in space there. Since he's returned, he's had 10 catches during those 3 games. So I would start as a mid-range running back too. Then there's Latavius Murray. He only has value. If Cook misses time, sit him. You got Sony Michel, plays the Vikings, allow the 6th fewest points to running backs there. He struggled all year with knee issues, but when he's been healthy, this guy's been great. Last 5 games that he's played, when he's healthy, during that 5 games, he's had 5 touchdowns. He's averaged 96 rushing yards per game and a healthy yards per carry of 4.82. You always need to monitor his health for Sony. That's always an issue. So as the week goes on, even Sunday mornings, it's always good to follow up and make sure that he's going to go. But if he plays, you need to start him as a running back too. He's got better value in standards than he does in PPR leagues. James White. He's the team's MVP this season, and he's a PPR stud. 10 touchdowns on the year, 67 catches for 576 receiving yards. He's on pace for 97 catches. He's a must-start in PPR leagues as a high-end running back 2. In standards, he's a running back 3 versus the Vikes. Sony Michel's return hurts his value a little bit there. As far as wide receivers go, you have Josh Gordon. His arrival for the Patriots has really solidified him as a solid player and a solid wide receiver. They've made his floor very safe, but it's also hurt his ceiling because they love to spread the ball around so much to different players there. He's not going to get 15 targets a game like he did years ago for the Browns. Now, the one thing that bodes well for him is Xavier Rhodes, like I mentioned previously, might miss that game. If he does, that helps all the Patriots wide receivers. The Vikings allow the 5th fewest points to wide receivers. So I look at the last 5 games. Josh Gordon has averaged 85 yards per game. I think he's got more value in standards. I would start as a wide receiver 3. Got Julian Edelman. Slot receivers have generally speaking, have had more success versus the Vikings than other receivers, which bodes well for Edelman, who is since returning from suspensions, having a good season. The last 4 games, his production has increased. He's had double-digit targets 3 of 4 games. He's had over 100 yards twice, averaging 91 yards during that same stretch. So I would start as a wide receiver 2 in PPRs, a wide receiver 3 in standards. Look at Stephon Diggs. So the Patriots allow the 14th fewest points to wide receivers. When Stephon Diggs is healthy, he's got top 10 wide receiver talent. He's got a ton of talent. This year, he's averaging 97 yards per game, and he's got his most catches ever in terms of his per game averages. If you take his per game averages over 16 games, Projected, that would be 126 catches, 1,264 yards, and 10 touchdowns. You need to start him as a wide receiver too when he's healthy, and right now he is healthy. Adam Thielen, stud wide receiver, currently has 93 catches, 1,138 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Like, if he didn't play another snap and he ended with those statistics, that'd be a great year for him. So start him. As far as tight ends go, yeah, Kyle Rudolph finally had a productive game. You have to go all the way back to week 3 before he was productive. This guy's got limited talent. Yes, he plays the Patriots, who allow the 4th most points to tight ends, but he's having a bad season, and honestly, I don't trust around Kyle Rudolph, and I would sit him. Then you got Rob Gronkowski. Returned last week, finally, after missing some games. Returns, gets a touchdown. Didn't have a lot of yards, didn't have a lot of catches or targets, but they kind of blew out the Jets. Became a lopsided game in the second half there. He's a guy, Rob Gronkowski, when he plays, you got to start him. As far as kickers go, start Gostkowski and Dan Bailey. This is a game that he should be started in. Last week, he missed some more kicks, and he's in the coach's doghouse at this point. So I would sit him in a windy stadium in cold weather there. There's a lot of question marks. And sit both defenses in this one.
All right. All right, we got the Seahawks versus the 49ers, a nice little divisional matchup. Obviously, I like Russell Wilson, 7 straight games with multiple touchdowns, and he's got a good matchup. Of course, you're going to start him if you got him. On the other side, quarterback Nick Mullen, I'm going to bench him. Not only is Seattle very tough right now, 5th fewest against quarterbacks, but honestly, he just doesn't have a whole lot of weapons, and he hasn't been fantastic since his first game. The running back, what about Matt Breida? I really like Matt Breida. Not only is Seattle giving up the 14th most points to running backs, Breida's had 2 good games in a row, 2 games over 100 yards. The good yards per carry at 29.7 fantasy points and 18.5. He's been producing. If you're looking for an RB2 or a flex, Breida's a great option. We come now to the Seattle running back situation. Unfortunately, I can't tell you to start any of these guys. I love it from a coaching perspective as far as being Pete Carroll. I'd love to have Chris Carson, Mike Davis, and Rashad Penny. They all seem to have their roles. You got Chris Carson, who seems to be the guy right now as a solid back on the ground. Rashad Penny, who's the guy for the future and is really starting to work his way in. And then Mike Davis, who is kind of the receiving back, all able to do some things and all able to mix up in there. But that running back by committee system, as we all know, just doesn't work for fantasy, so I can't really, I guess, tell anyone to put any of those guys in their lineups. Now, as the wide receivers go, Tyler Lockett is the best wide receiver in Seattle right now. He's scored in all but 3 games this year. All but 3 games this year he's scored. He's got 8 touchdowns on the season. He is a very, very good start, a solid wide receiver too, especially in this matchup against the 49ers, who give the 12th most points to wide receivers. David Moore is probably the next guy in that offense. He hasn't caught more than 4 passes in any game, but he scored 5 touchdowns in 8 games. He really took off last game where he had 4 catches for 103 yards and a touchdown. So David Moore, if you're looking for a guy who is a little bit risky, but you're looking for a wide receiver 3, David Moore might be the guy. As far as Doug Baldwin goes, he's been seriously demoted this season down to wide receiver 3. He's been banged up and struggled and been held to 52 or fewer yards in 4 of his 5 games. Plus, he's only got 1 touchdown all year. So honestly, I think he's probably going to have to stay out of lineups for now. As far as the 49ers receivers go, honestly, they don't have great wideouts. The only guy I'm going to mention is Marquise Goodwin. If you want to hear about some other guys, feel free to ask me in the comments below. But he hasn't had more than 5 targets at all this season in a single game. And he was inactive last week due to some personal issues. He will be back this week, but he really hasn't been that productive. And Seattle's defense seems to be getting better as the year goes on and is pretty middle of the pack. And so I'm not a huge fan of Goodwin this week. As far as tight ends go, George Kittle is a guy who we like coming into this season, and we continue to like him. But then he's kind of struggled a little bit lately. Not only does Seattle give the 9th fewest points to tight ends, while he is averaging 8 targets a game over the last 5 games, he's not getting a lot of yards. He's not getting a lot of touchdowns. That's a product of his quarterback situation. It's not his fault. He's a talented tight end, but he shouldn't be started this week unless you can't find another option. Seattle tight end Nick Bennett, he's held to 22 or fewer yards in 4 of his 5 games, and he's only got 2 touchdowns all year. So the tough matchup against a team that gives it the 12th fewest points to tight ends is probably not the week to play him. Kicker goes Robbie Gould. He's got a tough matchup, and that offense isn't moving the ball. I would not start him at kicker. Janikowski. He's kicked better the last 2 games, but simply isn't kicking enough. However, this could be the game I might start him with low expectations. 49ers give the 12th most points to kickers, and I think this could certainly be the week where he takes off or continues what he's done the 2 weeks prior. Of course, you got to start Seattle's defense. 49ers give the 4th most points to opposing defenses. While they've only combined for 8 fantasy points in the past 4 weeks, they have had a lot tougher matchups. This is a very easy matchup. I think that they could certainly take advantage of that, though because of the way they've played the last 4 weeks, I completely understand anybody who doesn't trust them, who finds it to be a risk. And then San Francisco, you're not going to play them. They've combined for just 2 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks. They have been brutal. That defense is not great at all. And of course, Seattle is not seeming to turn the ball over very much. That is my rundown for this game.
Yeah, you look at George Kittle there, and Nick Mullins is hurting him. His matchup is tough. I don't know who's going to have somebody better than him to pick up or play on their bench. Although, going back to what we talked about earlier, a lot of people have actually dropped Eric Ebron with Jack Doyle being back. Of course, now we mentioned Jack Doyle is on the IR, so what a great play if you're fortunate enough that he's available to pick up. Otherwise, it's such a tough position out there to find anybody of quality. Let's look at the Chargers versus the Steelers. Let's start with Ben Roethlisberger in this one. Chargers allowed the 2nd fewest points to quarterbacks. In the last 2 games, he's had 5 interceptions, but he's also averaged 25.97 points per game during those 2 games, even with the 5 interceptions. And during those 2 games, he's averaged 388 passing yards. On the year, he's averaging 333 passing yards per game, and he's on pace for a career-best 35 touchdown passes. Currently, he's 4th in quarterback scoring. We actually had him ranked really high this year, and we got a lot of heat for it. We had him as the 5th overall quarterback in our preseason rankings. Right now, it looks like he's on pace to prove that right. Start this guy. You got Philip Rivers playing the Steelers, allowing the 14th most points to quarterbacks. So I think the loss of Melvin Gordon could actually help Philip Rivers. And here's what I mean by that. Austin Eckler is going to take over as that lead back for a while. Austin Eckler is not going to run the ball nearly as effective as Melvin Gordon did, but he's very good in the passing game. So I think they're going to see a lot more utilization there, passing the ball, dump offs here and there, screen plays, things like that. Then you also consider the fact that Pittsburgh is very good at shutting down the run. They're top 5 in terms of shutting down running backs there. So I think Philip Rivers will need to throw a lot in this game. He's having his best season as a pro in terms of his quarterback rating. That's 115. He's on pace for 38 touchdown passes. Start Philip Rivers in this game. As far as running backs go, you have Austin Eckler. Steelers allowed the 5th fewest points to running backs. He's a smaller back at only 200 points. He's most successful in PPR league scoring. Last game with Gordon out, he had 10 catches. So I would start him in PPR leagues as a solid running back 2. In standards, he's a running back 3. As far as Justin Jackson goes, he might have a role. We'll see what that's going to look like, but we need to see what his workload is like, his snap distribution, his touches.
Yeah, especially because I wouldn't play him, and I think that's what you're kind of saying right now, because we don't know. Especially because we're at a time in the year where you're either out of the playoffs and it doesn't matter, you're in the playoffs and why waste a roster spot right now on a guy you can't trust, or you're fighting to get in the playoffs and you're going to take a risk on this guy. So yeah, I just definitely think that we need to wait and see.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I was going to say. Said him, James Conner. Last 3 weeks he's been quiet, but he's still a running back 1 that you need to start. Got 11 touchdowns on the year, 49 catches, 1,302 total yards in 11 games. This is a guy that you're going to start James Conner. As far as wide receivers go, Antonio Brown is matchup proof. Now, there are cornerbacks that can slow him down, but you cannot stop him. He's just going to produce. Then Juju Smith-Schuster. Between those two, I look at Diggs and Thielen and Brown and Schuster. Got to be the best wide receiving core as far as the 1 or 2 guys go there. Those guys are great. Start Juju also. Keenan Allen. He's playing the Steelers, allowing the 13th most points to wide receivers. Last year, after Week 9, he exploded. Just took off. Well, he's kind of done it again. You look at since Week 9, he's averaging 89 yards per game with 28 catches during that stretch and 3 touchdowns. Go ahead and start him. As far as the other wide receivers for the Chargers go, you have Mike Williams and Tyrell Williams. Mike has had a decent sophomore year. He's got 10 touchdowns, but his yards have been lower. Then Tyrell Williams, he had 2 huge games. He exploded over 100 yards. But we said his targets and his touches are just low. It's hard to trust his production. Sure enough, he's a guy that's boom or bust. He might have you 100 yards and a touchdown, but he might disappear. And so playing either one of those guys is rolling the dice. So for me, Tyrell Williams is a wide receiver 5 and Mike Williams is a wide receiver 4 in this matchup. As far as tight ends go, you have Antonio Gates. He had 1 big week where he turned back the hands of time, looked great out there, but he's a shadow of his former self. Sit him. Then you have Vance McDonald. Vance McDonald is questionable with a hip injury. So look at Vance McDonald and Jesse James. They really devalue each other there. If one sits, then I'm comfortable starting the other one. I would say if Vance McDonald plays, I would not play either. But if Vance McDonald sits, then I would trust starting Jesse James in this one. I would sit Boswell and Badgley, or Badgley, I think you would call it. Badgley, the kicker for the Chargers, actually having a very good year there. Problem with it is he's very inexperienced. He's going to be kicking in Pittsburgh, a stadium that is known to be windy and cause trouble for kickers. I would sit him, and I would sit both defenses. So down to our last game. Once again, before I finish the game, there's so much we want to tell, what goes into our research, why we feel justified with these picks and where we place them. But if you want specific answers to your questions, put them on the bottom. Let's get into our final game. The Redskins versus the Eagles. Look at Colt McCoy playing Philadelphia, allowing the 7th most points to quarterbacks. Colt is a fair play against a defense that's struggling badly lately. But concerns I have is the Redskins' offensive line is very beat up. Wide receivers are not great. So I think you're probably going to have better options out there, even though he's not a bad matchup play. I would probably look elsewhere. Now you got Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz had 6 games where he was really good. During a 6-game stretch, he had 14 touchdown passes to only 2 interceptions. Now he struggled the last 2 games. He's playing the Skins. The Redskins allow the 13th most points to quarterbacks. This is a must-win game at home. For me, he's a guy that I think is going to have a solid game there, but he's not a top 10 quarterback. Now you got Josh Adams. So the Redskins allow the 13th fewest points to running backs there. The coach earlier last week had said they're going to get him more touches. He would become the lead back. They did that, and he responded. He responded with 84 yards. He had a touchdown and a 2-point conversion. He's their lead back going forward. He should be started as a running back too. Now, Corey Clement had a nice game. He had some stuff that I kind of expected he would do. When Jay Ajayi was out, I thought Corey Clement would fill into that role nicely, and he struggled. He did do better last game, but I think that we really need more before we can really warrant consideration there or trust him. We need to have a couple more games, so I would sit Clement. As far as Adrian Peterson goes, Philadelphia is in the middle of the pack in terms of points allowed to running backs. He's having a great season. They lost 3 starters on the offensive line, and some other guys are banged up and injured there. That's really just too much to overcome, and a lack of weapons. Defenses can really focus on shutting down Adrian Peterson. Through the first 8 games, he was averaging 84 rushing yards per game. In the last 4, since they've had those injuries to the offensive line, 42 rushing yards per game. I would sit Adrian Peterson. Then you got Capri Bibbs and Chris Thompson. Sounds like Chris is going to return this week. If he does, he's a nice play in PPR leagues as a running back 3 or flex play. If Chris sits, then you could play Bibbs in that same role. As far as wide receivers go, you got Alshon Jeffrey playing the Redskins, allowing the 7th most points to wide receivers. The first 4 games he was great, and then the last 4 games he's been a big disappointment. So the question is, which Alshon Jeffrey is going to show up? We don't know. I still think he holds value there. He's still their best wide receiver, start as a wide receiver 3. You have Golden Tate. He's a wide receiver 4. The offensive coordinator for Philadelphia said it's been difficult to integrate him into the offense, and we've seen that. He just hasn't taken off there for him as an Eagle, so I would sit him. As far as wide receivers go for the Redskins, you have Josh Doctson there. Former first-round pick is their best wide receiver right now. That's not saying a whole lot, but he does play Philadelphia, allowing the 2nd most points to wide receivers. So he has some what I would call sleeper appeals of wide receiver 3. As far as tight ends go, you got Zach Ertz. He's their best weapon. He's a stud tight end. Yes, he has a tougher matchup versus the Skins, allowing the 9th fewest points to tight ends, but you're going to start Zach Ertz. It doesn't matter. Go ahead and start him. Then you got Jordan Reed. Since McCoy's taken over at quarterback, he's averaged 6.5 catches per game and 73 yards per game. He also had a touchdown in there. So I would start Jordan Reed, but you do have to remember that he's playing Philadelphia, allowing the 3rd fewest points to tight end, so start him with low expectations. I would start Elliott, I would sit the Skins kicker, and I would sit both defenses. That's a lot of information.
There it is.
That's it. All right. Thanks once again for joining us. Feel free to like, comment, share videos, help us grow the community. Thank you once again. God bless and take care.